Throughout the history of my YouTube channel, I have not done a lot of POV videos, in other words, wearing the camera while I ride, but I'm wanting to get into some more of that. And lately, I've set out on a mission to make my POV videos as good as possible. I've been completely unsatisfied with the way they've looked in the past. I've solved the upload, so if you follow my channel, you know it's uploading in 4K is the difference to get the POV videos looking good. But today what I'm doing is I'm going to set out and I'm going to test the Hypersmooth of the Hero 7, which is what I'm filming with now, versus the gimbal. So 2 days ago, I rode some sections with the gimbal. Today, I'm going to do it with the Hero 7 and only use Hypersmooth. All right, starting off with the gimbal, and I'm using the GoPro Karma Grip, and I'm indicating on the bottom right what I'm using in each scene. And I'm using the GoPro Karma Grip extension cable. So I've got the Karma Grip handle in my jersey pocket and the extension cable running to the chest mount. And I'm using the new chesty, which does a better job of keeping the camera flat against your chest. So you can see the gimbal here, the Karma Grip, does a really good job of keeping the scene smooth. Now switching over to the GoPro Hero 7 Hypersmooth. And Hypersmooth, by the way, just refers to electronic image stabilization. And it does a very good job when the trail is not too bumpy. As soon as you hit some roots or rocks or something that causes the camera to bounce on your chest, that's when you start to see some jitter in the video. Something that's worth noting about the Hypersmooth is it needs a fair amount of light, which I did have on the day I was shooting. Now we're switching over to the gimbal. So back to the lighting, if it's really cloudy and you're under a lot of heavy tree cover, then the Hypersmooth just can't keep up. It's going to have a lot more shake than if you had some really good lighting. As we're looking at the footage with the gimbal, a couple advantages that I want to mention about the gimbal. One is it keeps the camera in a really good position. In other words, when I was using the Hypersmooth, I found that the camera was pointing down a little bit too. That was my error, but it does accentuate the fact that the gimbal just keeps that camera perfectly up and down. Sometimes when you reach forward with the camera not mounted on the gimbal, it can point down a little bit too much. And I've got too much of my knees in the video here, which I don't like. So like I said, the gimbal just keeps that camera in the right position without you having to think about it. Another advantage of the gimbal is the fact that it also acts as a charger for your GoPro. So if the Karma Grip is fully charged, you can get 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours of keeping the GoPro on, and the Karma Grip will act as an external battery pack. Now to me, the main disadvantage of the GoPro Karma Grip is the fact that you cannot use an external microphone. So if you wanted to do a lot of talking and you wanted an external microphone, then you can't do that with the Karma Grip. In this scene, I wanted to do a side-by-side because it points out what I'm talking about with the jitters in the video. So on the right is the Hypersmooth, on the left is the gimbal. And you can see there are instances where I hit some roots where the camera bounces up and down on my chest, and that causes the Hero 7 with the Hypersmooth to bounce. Whereas when you go over those same bumps with the gimbal, it's really just perfectly smooth. So I think it's fair to say the rougher the trail, the more advantage you're going to have using the gimbal. All right, now we're coming up to the final scene, and this is a nice flowy trail. Right as I make the left-hand turn, there are some roots, which here with the gimbal, you can't even tell that there are roots and the camera moves up and down. Whereas when I showed this scene with the Hero 7 and Hypersmooth, you'll see the camera jitter a little bit. Now these flowy trails that don't have a lot of bumps, I think both do an excellent job. And I just want to mention that there are times when I put the camera on the front of my bike on gravel roads, and in those instances, I do not need a gimbal at all. The Hypersmooth does a good job because gravel roads are not as rough and bumpy as a mountain bike trail. All right, now we're coming up to the final scene with the Hypersmooth, and for the most part, it does a good job in this scene because the trail is not too rough. You'll see that I'll take a left-hand turn up here and the camera will shake, whereas it did not right there with the gimbal. But once we get onto this flowy single track, the Hypersmooth does a really good job. So what I learned from doing this test is if you do not need an external microphone, the gimbal is going to be the way to go if you can fit it into your budget and if you don't mind the extra complexity and the bulk of having a gimbal. If that is an issue, then really the Hypersmooth of the Hero 7 is, to me, probably the best electronic image stabilization I've seen on an action cam, and I think it'll be fine for a lot of people out there. So that'll wrap up my testing gimbal versus Hypersmooth. Next week, I'm going to be comparing the audio of this camera with an external microphone and then without, both with the windscreen on and without the windscreen on. So you may want to check that out. Thanks for watching.